the very first Parsha in the book of Leviticus. And today we are together for Bamidbar, the very first Parsha in the book of Numbers. So it's awesome to be able to open these books of the Torah with all of you. So before we begin, let's say our blessing for studying Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So before we get started, does anybody know anything about the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers? Because I want to do just a short orientation to the book itself, and then we're going to go into the Parsha. And when we look at the Parsha, we are going to be jumping around a lot, looking at a few verses from each of the chapters. But before we do, any big themes anybody knows or remembers about this book? Bamidbar, Book of Numbers.
Not enough that I can share.
Okay.
I think it's an interesting book. You know, it's got a boring title, but having gone through it now a couple times, it's interesting. And there's a story about the donkey in there.
Mm-hmm. We've got a talking donkey.
Right. It's kind of it's a layered book. It's much more than its title.
Yes. And I'm glad you brought up the title, because the title in English and Hebrew is different. So the title in English is Numbers, and that's because, as we're going to see together, the book begins and it actually ends as well with a census. But in Hebrew, the book is called Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. And I'm going to say it's the last leg of the Israelites' journey in the wilderness, but it's not just the last leg. It's like the 38 of the 40 years of their journey in the wilderness. It's really the biggest chunk of that. And so it's interesting, sort of the differences and nuances in the Hebrew versus the English name, and both of them speak to different aspects of the book and of the story. Penina, go ahead. Penina, can you unmute?
Okay. All right. They say, En mukdam can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. En mukdam u'meuchar b'Torah. There is no late or early in the Torah, because they found subjects or content of archaeology or whatever it is, scriptures, that we're trying to fit it into a certain time and a certain era, and it might not be exact. In other words, you take what they say, you take what the content means to teach you, not when it happened. Because it's not promised or, how would I say, recorded, that it actually followed the same dates and the same situations or the same page that it shows up when you buy the book today.
Yeah, and something that's interesting about this book in particular, in terms of what's happening in the book, is that we have a mix of law and narrative. And so we have the continuation of the story and the continuation of the laws that we've gotten in previous books, but everything in this book is alternated. So you have a chunk of law and then a chunk of narrative, a chunk of law and a chunk of narrative. And the entire book follows that exact pattern. Other things that anybody wants to share or remember about the book of Bamidbar?
Oh, there's some rebellions there.
Yes.
And was it Dathan? Yeah, big rebellions and big consequences too.
Yes, yes.
And
so
striking a rock, is that in there too?
Yeah, and that actually comes up multiple times. It's interesting. Like there's one big moment, but it comes up multiple times. And And part of the rebellions are another theme that we have throughout the book, and not just in the book of Bamidbar, but we really see it heavily here, is the theme of the Israelites complaining. So of course that started long before this book, but we see it throughout, and we really see God's patience and Moses's patience continuing to be tested throughout this book. Yeah, Rebecca, go ahead.
What I wrote from previous Bible studies or Torah studies is that we're a part of a living Torah. This is a story of us being alive and being with the Torah, right? And there's 600,003 words, the same number of people that were in the desert. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there are different commentaries about that. It's interesting. I really like using the Eitz Chaim Chumash, and the Eitz Chaim Chumash says that there, like you said, 603,550 people who were counted in the census at the very beginning of the book, and that's how many words there are in the Torah. I will say there are some disputes about like whether those figures are exactly correct, but regardless, the numbers are very close, which feels very meaningful. Yeah, Brad.
Rabbi, did you say that we're at basically year 38 or 39 post-Exodus at this point?
No, we're going to see it in the very beginning. Actually, you know what? Let me share my screen because we see it in the very first verse. Okay. Okay, so this is verse 1, chapter 1 of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. The very first verse tells us where we are from the Exodus from Egypt. On the first day of the second month, in the second year, following the Exodus from the land of Egypt, God spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting. So we are only right now in year 2, and the rest of the 38 years in the wilderness, like almost the entire thing, takes place within the rest of this book. So we are actually not too far right now from the Exodus. And this is an important point also, because if this is only 2 years after the Exodus from Egypt, and I mean, we're coming up to Shavuot in a few days, celebrating receiving the 10 Commandments, receiving the Torah from God at Mount Sinai. So that was very recent. So that is something important to keep in mind, that at the beginning of this book, this is still the same generation of people who were slaves, who were redeemed, and who were there for revelation. However, by the end of this book, that generation dies, and it's a new generation of people who will be entering the promised land. So to me, that's something so interesting about the book, is we really see that shift. Yeah, Brad, go ahead.
Well, it seems to me that everything in the Torah either points to the Exodus or refers back in some way to the Exodus. The Exodus is the prism through which we need to read all of these things. Am I way off base there or not?
No, I think it's true. And I mean, it's not just in the Torah, but it's also, we see that in our liturgy as well. Constant, and like different prayers, like I'm thinking about Friday night Kiddush also for Shabbat talks about the Exodus, and it also talks about creation. So I think in many ways in the book of Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, the historical reference point often is like that comes up in our liturgy is creation. And then as a Jewish people, the historical reference point that comes up, not just for that one little family, but for us as a nation that comes up is the Exodus from Egypt. And I also think it's interesting that the way time is counted is from the Exodus. It's not saying like we are not moving through here and saying it has been this many years since the creation of the world or this many years since God spoke to Abraham. Like the point of reference for everybody is the Exodus from Egypt. Okay, Panina disagrees. Go ahead. Panina, I need to unmute you. Can you unmute?
What? Okay now?
Yes.
Okay, I think the whole idea is to show that the promise to Abraham was fulfilled. It's not actually the travel in the desert. The travel in the desert was just a process of changing people that weren't even believing in God to begin with, the one that chose to follow the Hebrews, that there was a shift. And the shift was this introducing the Torah and the laws in the desert. So once they choose to actually follow that, because they followed Moses all this time, and now they're at the foot of the place where it was promised to Abraham. The whole idea showing you that the whole generation was a transformation of what they believe in. Once they enter the land, it's the fulfillment of the promise. Lecha eten et haaretz hazot. I will give this land to you. And the deal was, if you believe in me. So now they are there at entering, but
or they're not there. They're not entering yet.
not
They're
yet.
still,
It doesn't matter.
yeah.
But they already have the Torah, and they are now in
Yeah.
the process of adapting and changing. And now there is a choice to make, and it's all about choices. The choice is that now they all chose to follow wherever Moses taught them, because they said in the foot of the mountain, they said, we will hear and we will obey. Naaseh v'nishma. So
And I
there
think
is a
they're really
transformation.
similar.
Now we are at the point of entering, and the idea is that they all entering, and they're not entering a strange place. The people that
But
left,
we're very far from entering. We're
you
still
are
40
looking
years from
at dates
entering.
and things which you cannot look. You have to look now of what happened to the people spiritually. They are now about to enter the land, but the land was already occupied by the tribes who
Yeah,
never left.
yeah, I want to pause just because I don't want to get too far into what's going to happen when they enter, just because we're so much earlier right now that they still haven't even like left the area of Mount Sinai. But I think what you're saying is similar in that God, even from the point of the Exodus, says to the Israelites, well, it says to Moses to say to Pharaoh, let my people go so they may worship me. And so I think that like that piece, I think what you and Brad are saying is actually very similar. That all of the goals behind this are grounded in the Exodus from Egypt, and at the same time, they're really based on this relationship with God. So one other thing I just want to point out before we get into the text, is that I think it's significant that, of course, our books of the Torah are named for the first main word in that book of the Torah. So in this case, Bamidbar, in the wilderness. And at the same time, I think that has deep meaning this week, specifically as we begin the book of Bamidbar, when we are about to celebrate Shavuot. And this Parsha is the Parsha that is read not every year, but almost every year right before Shavuot. And so we find ourselves, Bamidbar, we find ourselves in the desert, just like the Israelites, when we are about to receive Torah. And there's an interesting conversation that takes place in the Talmud around why specifically the Torah was given and needed to be received in the wilderness. So before we get to the text, I'd love to hear some ideas about what folks think. Why was the Torah given in the wilderness of all places? What could be the significance of that? Benjamin.
Well, maybe in the wilderness, there are less distractions,
Yeah.
and one can really take this thing, which kind of it's a lot to put on somebody, the Torah, but without these distractions, one could focus.
Nice. So an opportunity to really concentrate on what is in front of them without any, like you said, distractions, any outside noise, anything that could take them away from being fully present there. Nice. Susan, did you want to say something also?
Oh, that's what I was going to say too. And you're also in the most stark environment. It's not, I don't know, my husband loves the desert. I don't. It looks like it's exceedingly hot or exceedingly cold or windy. And it's barren. Life, to me, it seems like, to me, it has a death-like. I know it isn't for a lot of other people, but I was going to say what Benjamin said too. Free of distractions, concentration, and it's a nothingness, flat,
Yeah.
sand, sky.
And it's interesting that you said a nothingness, because one of the names for God in like Hasidic writings is Ayin, which means nothingness.
Yeah, I know. Yes,
Yeah. And so there's something about
like that.
like the nothingness filling a space that otherwise might feel void in some way.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, I think of the desert as a place without morality, and that what the Torah brings us is a moral code.
Nice. Almost like a Wild West kind of a vision for the desert. And we see that lack of morality too in the confrontations that the Israelites have in the desert. So we as a people have experienced what that's like. And now, because of Mount Sinai, have the responsibility of, as the Israelite people who become the Jewish people, needing to fulfill and bring morality to this space, where there is often violence. We have stories of Amalek coming around from behind the tribes and really horrible things. And now, how can we, I think, also order that chaos? Yeah, Meryl.
I think, we've lived here in Phoenix for 50 years. And I think that a lot of the nothingness, which we really liked moving when we moved here, is being taken away by construction and lack of morality. So as a result, when we go back and forth to places where we have to cross desert, whether we're going to Tucson or Prescott or somewhere up north, it's disturbing to see how people are taking away the nothingness, which really has its beauty. And it's become sort of sad after a while.
That's interesting that you can see it also playing out like right where you live, right in front of you.
Very much so. And it's very different than, our neighborhood is different than when we moved here.
Wow.
So it's weird, and not having some of that nothingness is disturbing.
So it's also noticeable when like aspects of it are taken away.
Very much so.
Yeah. Panina, and then we're gonna keep going. And Panina, you need to unmute.
All right. Things changed in Israel. When they left, they only left 60 people. The rest of the tribes stayed and settled there. But in the meantime, the land was nothing when Abraham got there because he had to dig wells. Nobody could live there. In the meantime, there were other nations who were passing through and took Like the Philistine, for example, later on, they settled in 6 cities, but they were coming and going. So once they're
Oh,
in the
but
desert,
so
there was nobody to fight, but they were preparing them. They said they counted everybody and they
sorry,
prepared them.
Pavina. I just want to clarify that we're talking about the wilderness, so
Yes, I'm saying
not the
that
land.
the wilderness did not how did I say, presented them with other people that fought them on the way and were not believing in God. Once they entered Israel, they expected other nations to fight them. Those nations would not be Hebrews or would not have the commitment, the moral commitment that the Israelis have. So the first thing they're doing, they're
Right.
preparing them that they're going to
Right. So
meet
back to
different situations.
the morality that is being brought through what happened at Mount Sinai, and now we see them still literally in this first verse. They are still in the wilderness of Sinai. They are near the mountain. They are near that place of revelation. I also want to share a one sentence from the Talmud that specifically talks about this. And the Talmud describes giving the Torah in the wilderness as an opportunity for one, openness, recognizing that wide open space is a way for us also to be open when we receive Torah, not just at that moment at Mount Sinai, but all of us, every single generation and every moment. How can we be open to receiving Torah? Which I think is something that's so wonderful about this group that learns together every single week. There is such an openness here to learning Torah. And the other piece that the Talmud talks about regarding the desert is that it is accessible to everyone. That for the most, and obviously there are nuances to all of this, but that no one owns that space, that it's a place anybody can go, rich or poor, young or old, whatever it is. It's a space that can be accessible to everyone, just as Torah should be and can be accessible to everyone too. And that's a little preview for what I'm talking about on Sunday night for the book that I get to talk about during our Shavuot celebration. So I just want to share this one sentence from the Talmud in Tractate Nedarim. It says, one should be as open as the wilderness to receive the Torah. And so I think that's also a way that we can read what God wants of the people as we begin this book of Bamidbar. That I think God wants the people to display an openness. And I think that's something that we are going to see the Israelites struggling with. That they are in a space of openness, and God wants them mentally to be there too, and not just physically, and trying to help them along that way. All right, so we are going to get back into the text. So the first part of the text that we are reading about is a census. This is the first major census that takes place of the Israelite community in the Torah. We have a lot, especially in the book of Bereshit and the book of Genesis, genealogies and lists of people. This is a very intentional list for a very specific purpose. All right. On the first day of the second month in the second year following the exodus from the land of Egypt, God spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting, saying, take a census of the whole Israelite company of fighters by the clans of its ancestral houses, listing the names, every male by head. All right. So just based on verse number 2, what is the purpose of this census?
Well, it says fighters. So a company, I mean, they have it in Korean, but we're really talking about men and
Yes.
in protecting the people in the army. Well, I mean, there's no army, but fighters.
Nice. So it is trying to create an army. Yeah, Benjamin, what were you going to say?
Sorry to interrupt you, Rabbi, but to me, it's interesting this idea of a census and how here in the Torah, it's important, obviously, but also in our Constitution of the United States, census is dictated every 10 years. So there must be something to it, that it's important to know not only what your numbers, I guess.
Yeah, and the census at the beginning of Bamidbar is different than the census at the end. So clearly, God and Moses are interested in knowing these numbers, knowing who is part of this community, what are the demographics. But at this particular point, it's really about those who are able to fight. But at the end of the book of Bamidbar, as they are about to enter the land, the promised land, the census is about everybody. And so that's more of who can then inhabit that land, how many people are we, who are we as a nation. But here it's specifically, I think, foreshadowing for us all of the conflict to come in the rest of this book, the wars that are about to happen, and making sure that people are prepared for that. And we see that in the next two verses too. You and Aaron shall record them by their groups from the age of 20 years up. All those in Israel who are able to bear arms associated with you shall be a participant from each tribe, each one the head of his ancestral house. So this is a very specific type of census, that it's only men. It is only men above age 20 who are, that's sort of who they imagine are able to bear arms, which is interesting. I would think the age bracket would be younger, but of course ages in the Torah are not necessarily how we think about them today. I wonder if 20 here is just sort of a round number. I don't know if it's specific, it might be, but that's just sort of like an interesting number here. And then we see them, they're about to be, we're not going to get into this so much because it's more of a long list of names, but now all of those people are going to be grouped by the 12 tribes and have a head from each of the tribe who's sort of the leader. So in addition to the census and building up of this army, we also see a scaffolding of military leadership, that Moses and Aaron are the ones counting. Moses obviously has his specific role as leader. Aaron has his specific role as the priest. And now each of the heads of these clans are going to be the heads for their communities in fighting. Yeah, Rebecca.
I find it curious that they're preparing for war, because so far there hasn't been any war. Has there? Has there been any mention of any kind of conflict with any other roving tribes?
Yes, there has been already.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. And I think it's also part of it is in preparation to enter the land and to make sure that there are people who can fight too, for when that happens many years down the road. Okay, so I'm going to skip down. These are a lot of names of all the people who are fighting. I want to skip down. Okay. Oh, and this is what Rebecca was bringing up before. All who were enrolled came to this number of about 600,000. So also just thinking about like the people, that was probably the number of people who left Egypt also, around that number. Susan, yeah, go ahead.
Just a quick interjection. I have in my notes here that apparently there's 550,000 Israel letters in the Torah. So somebody did that. I don't know who, it wasn't me.
Yeah, so Rebecca brought that up earlier. I love that you all have notes from years of Torah study. That's awesome. So, and I was looking more into it, and it seems like different people have different calculations of how many words there are in the Torah, but I'm going to go with that. It's the same number because regardless, the numbers are very close. And that's, yeah, and one of the commentaries I've also seen for this, a possible significance for that, and maybe this has come up in your past Torah study as well, is that it represents how just like each word in the Torah is significant and matters and has a purpose, every single Israelite is significant and matters and has a purpose and has a role to play also. And I think that's just a beautiful way of looking at our own community, that we all matter, and we also, every single one of us has a responsibility and a role to play in our communal journey as we move through together. So we are going to be picking up down here at verse 47. So the way the 12 tribes are laid out at this point, the 12 tribes originally came from the 12 sons of Jacob. However, the 12 tribes as we see them here are not exactly lined up with each of Jacob's 12 sons. Joseph is not one of the tribes. And Joseph was Jacob's favorite son. We know all about Joseph. A lot of our Torah is devoted to Joseph. Joseph is not one of the tribes. Instead, the tribes that are through Joseph's line are Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So those are two. So Joseph is not listed. And then the other tribe that here is not listed is the tribe of Levi. And that's because we are about to learn the special role that the tribe of Levi is going to play. All right. So the Levites, however, were not recorded among them by their ancestral tribe. For God had spoken to Moses, saying, "Do not on any account enroll the tribe of Levi or take a census of them with the Israelites. You shall put the Levites in charge of the tabernacle of the pact, all its furnishings, and everything that pertains to it. They shall carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings, and they shall tend it, and they shall camp around the tabernacle." And just to clarify, the tabernacle of the pact is specifically the ark that holds the 10 commandments in it. Two sets. One set is the complete set, and the other set is the smashed set, which was the original one that Moses threw on the ground when he saw the golden calf. So the tabernacle of the pact has both broken and whole sets of the 10 commandments in it. When the tabernacle is to set out, when the Israelites are on the move, the Levites shall take it down, and when the tabernacle is to be pitched and put back up again, the Levites shall set it up. Any outsider who approaches shall be put to death. The Israelites shall encamp troop by troop, each man with his division, and each under his standard. The Levites, however, shall camp around the tabernacle of the pact, that my wrath may not strike the Israelite community. The Levites shall stand guard around the tabernacle of the pact. The Israelites did accordingly, just as God had commanded Moses, so they did. And I'm just going to switch this view so that we only see it in translation, so it's easier to see more at once. Okay. So the Levites have this very special role. Why have a unique tribe for this? Why not use as many people as you can get for the army that's needed? Why do we need a whole set of people doing this?
That's a very good question. But I'm wondering if, well, first of all, the ark needs protectors and interpreters, and I mean, just like, rabbis, which later will become rabbis. And are they protected from war? Because you can't do both. On the other hand, I mean, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
You need to preserve the holy people who are in charge of holiness. Moses and Aaron go out, but they raise their hands and they are symbols. They're not actually with the swords.
So, right. So it's exactly the same with the Levites, that just like you said, Moses and Aaron, and also we know Aaron's children, they have their own unique leadership roles, and they are exempt in that way from, I'm going to call it military service, even though it's not being called that here. And so to the Levites, they are being given their own leadership role. And what that entails is protecting the tabernacle and putting it up, taking it down. The Israelites are on the move. They have a 38-year journey ahead of them from through the wilderness on their way to the promised land. They're going to be setting up a lot. They're going to be moving around a lot, needing to put it up and take it down. And so the Levites have a very specific role. And I think what you said is interesting, like when you use the word guard, that just like the tribes are guarding the Israelite community, so too the Israelites are guarding the most sacred object that is the connection between the Israel. That's the physical manifestation of the connection between the Israelites and God. And so both are sources of protection, just in different kinds of ways. Yeah, Rebecca.
Well, I also found it curious that it was at the age of 20, because what comes to my mind, who's protecting the women and the children? So that means then the older adult males, I guess, were then tasked with protecting the women and the children.
Yeah, and I think theoretically, like all of those men above age 20, it is their job to protect everybody else, all of the other Israelites. And that is the responsibility that all of them have to take on, no matter what. And it's interesting to me, it also happens by clan because it's so different than the way we do things Jewishly today, that things aren't really by clan or by family or anything like that anymore. People volunteer to do different kinds of things within the community that they want to do or that interests them. And here it's really, I think it's an easier way, I imagine, to organize a large group of people, especially when they need to do these censuses, because they don't know who these people, or they don't have a good enough understanding of who these people are and ways to organize that. So it's also like a window into how to organizing this religious society kind of for the first time. What was the other thing? Oh, the other thing about standing guard I wanted to point out is that there's a fear here too, where it says, any outsider who encroaches shall be put to death. There are previous stories from their time in the wilderness when, for example, Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, get too close to the Holy of Holies within the tabernacle. They get too close to God. It's called like Eish Zara, a strange fire, and they die. So there's also an interesting just system of belief here that anybody who gets physically close to the holiest place, who is not personally invited to be there, they are subject to God's wrath and to a very harsh punishment. Yeah, Brad.
Yeah, Rabbi, isn't there this concept of like the 36 morally, I don't know,
Lamed
the
Bavne.
yeah, the
The
elect,
Tzaddikim.
I don't know what they're called exactly.
Like the 36 righteous people. Is
The
that what you mean?
righteous, that's what I was referring to, the righteous. I couldn't put my fingers on the word. So I'm wondering why don't you have that concept here of the people guarding the tabernacle and the Torah being the righteous rather than people who just inherit this responsibility through birth?
And I have the exact same question about that and about the Kohanim, about the priests, that you would think both of those would be for people who are righteous, who have shown a level of morality or spirituality or connection to God in some way. And yeah, it's a completely different system. My own interpretation is that it was the easiest way to organize. And that Levi specific, well, Aaron obviously has a special role because of being Moses' brother, helping Moses and being his right hand with everything through the Exodus. And so it makes sense that Aaron would be elevated. And then if we think about a system in which things go by the family, then Aaron's family would be elevated. Levi is an interesting example in the Torah also, because we see him sort of being singled out in different kinds of ways. And we might expect Judah, because Judah's also singled out, and then Judah becomes, there's so much more to Judah, and David comes from Judah's line. So I think it's interesting that it's also not based on people's righteousness or morality, and it's also not based on like what we're going to see to come. Yeah, Susan?
So I think it's an interesting question, but I think we're dealing with a different social structure here.
Right.
A totally different one. And the Israelites have to learn morality. I mean, there are so many what we would later see as transgressions. And speaking of Judah and Levi, and sleeping with his father's concubine, and then again the fathers have several wives. We have to develop
Right.
a morality. So I don't think you can judge. The Lamed come later in the rabbinic period, when we don't have the temple and we have set a moral code and some experience. So I think it's a different society.
Nice. Yeah, we're seeing a different representation of like what was happening at that time and understanding the time and place in which this was taking place. I want to highlight if we imagine what this looks like visually, that the Levites are camping around the tabernacle itself. So if we have like an entire camp, in the center is the tabernacle, and the Levites are in this circle sort of protection around it, because in the next chapter, at the very beginning, we're going to see like what comes out, what continues to come out of that circle. Oh, and also with the Levites, the other thing I want to point out is that there's an aspect of this that is still preserved today. In many communities, the first three aliyot, the first two aliyot for Torah readings, the first one goes to a Kohen, to somebody who came from the priestly line of Aaron, and the second one goes to a Levite. And it's because of this hierarchy that we saw in the Torah and here in the wilderness. Okay. Chapter 2. God spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "The Israelites shall camp, each man with his standard, under the banners of their ancestral house. They shall camp around the tent of meeting at a distance." So just continuing to imagine physically what this might look like. The tabernacle at the center, the Levites around that, and then each camp around that with their own flags and their own banners, but still at a distance. Why even specify all of this? Like, why this specific layout, and why is that layout necessary? Yeah, Pnina. Oh wait, Pnina, you need to unmute, and then
Again,
Rebecca.
okay. The thing is that they had to join the tribes that never left when Joseph and his family went down to Egypt. The rest of the tribes, only 70 people went down there. So the rest of the people actually were already settled in the land. So now it's the idea of other nations and other people that in the time came in, either invaded or settled in certain areas, who the tribes have not been involved with. They all have their own areas where they lived. So that's why they told them to lift their flags before they went in, because each part with a certain flag joined the tribe that they belonged to. They knew which tribe they came from. Like I said,
Yeah.
70 people only came down, 600,000 left. You have to always remember that they had to be recognized who they were when they went in there, so they wouldn't
Yeah.
have to face a war with their own people. So they
Right. And like knowing, and in that way, like knowing who they are and also for themselves where they came from. I mean, I want to make sure Rebecca and Benjamin get a chance also. Yeah, Rebecca.
I've mentioned this before, and I'm going to mention it again. For the past 4 years, I've been taking Bible as literature through
Oh,
Santa Monica College Emeritus program, and so I just find it so curious that the flags and the banners are really a literary device, because how did they have cotton or whatever in the desert to make these identifying banners and flags? There must have been some way that they had to have been able to identify themselves, and I think it's just a literary device, but I find
interesting.
it curious.
Well, we do have, this isn't the only example of like material that we have in the Torah, because in the previous book, in previous books, there are so many parshiot that are dedicated to the different metals that the people had, how they even built this tabernacle, the curtain that would go in front of things. And so like material is so interesting in the Torah because it plays such a significant role. All right, Benjamin and then Meryl.
Well, not as scholarly an answer as the others, but I think when you're in a group and you have a flag and you create order and structure, and these are characteristics that people like to have. I remember when I was at summer camp, 8 years old, we all had our tribes and our names. I think we were the tadpoles, and it just helped us create identity, camaraderie, and then the bigger group, we kind of serve together. So I think it adds that element.
Nice. I think that is a huge piece of this. It is a sense, and also when we started with the census, it's understanding who the community is. And also, I think now in chapter 2, it's the community understanding themselves. Like, where and how do I fit in here? And like you said, that sense of camaraderie and a connection with other people and something to rally around and feel proud of. Yeah, exactly. And it like feels like camp. Everyone in the same t-shirt or something. It's so true. Or having a color. Yeah, Meryl, go ahead.
I just wanted to answer Rebecca's question about the cotton. We've lived in the same house now for 50 years. We're about 3 miles from the Indian reservation. Their primary crop of all of the reservations here in Arizona, besides casinos, is cotton. And we have a dear friend who owns like a ranch market kind of thing, who teaches the Native Americans how to grow and keep their farms with all their cotton growing, and teaches especially their kids, and they make a ton of money. And that's one of the big issues here, is they make all this money and the government doesn't get any of it because they're their own independent nation. So they've been growing this cotton in the desert for I can't tell you how many years.
That's so interesting.
Thank you so much for that, because now that I'm thinking about it, I mean, they were really in one spot for 35 years or so. They probably did have crops that they planted.
Right.
That's so interesting.
It's a huge industry here, and we're in the desert.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, Brad, go ahead.
Rabbi, I'm trying to visualize this. All the tribes are sort of in a circle around the ark. So is that saying that no one tribe is closer to the ark? In other words, there's no hierarchy of tribes. The only group that's different is the Levites. Am I on the right track or not?
Yes, I think so. That right, the Levites whose responsibility it is to care for the ark, it makes sense that they are surrounding it. If that is their number one job, is protecting this one thing, and everybody else is the same distance away. And I think also it says again at a distance in the text, which to me points to again like needing to still have some proximity. And at the same time, it means that every single person in the camp, when they wake up, when they go about their day, they can see the tabernacle. And even though they are at a distance, it is still the center for everybody. And I think still a grounding for what their true purpose is in their community of what they want to uphold, what they want to live up to, and also as they go out, what they're fighting for and what they're trying to preserve. And I want to just share something from the Eitz Chaim Chumash to Benjamin's point. There was a nice commentary that I liked about here in verse 2, how each camp is set up. And the commentary says a person's identity consists of three elements: the self, which is seen in the standard, the family, which is seen under their ancestral banners, and the community, which is seen in the tabernacle, in the tent of meeting that's at the center. So I wanted to end with that commentary that in the desert, where we think of as nothingness, but also at the same time openness and accessibility, that it's also a place of true grounding in different identities, identity of ourselves, identity within our families, and identity as a community. And I think that our goal as Jews, and especially thinking about Shavuah coming up in just a couple nights, is how we see those identities reflected in the Torah for us. So I want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom, a Chag Sameach. Hopefully I will see you on Zoom on Sunday night. And I hope everyone has a great weekend. Thank you so much for learning together today.
Thank you,
You
Rabbi.
too.
Thank you,
so much.
Rabbi.
Shabbat
Thank you.
shalom.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Be well, everyone.
Thank
Shabbat
you, Rabbi.
Shalom. Chag Sameach.
And Sameach. Very
Thank
good.
you. Hag Sameach.
Thank you, Rabbi. Love your
Thank you.
Excellent.
כן. אני לא רוצה לשמוע.